Hello.
I'm sure it will surprise everyone to hear we're having some technical difficulties.
All right.
So we're trying to get Facebook to come back up again.
Here
We got a green check, so hopefully that'll fix whatever's going
Wow,
on.
it's so much fun to have. I am just a hot mess over here. Wow. Oh,
I'm a cold mess, but I'm still a mess.
All right.
But I'm cold.
It's messy over here. I can't handle
They
it.
can't see it.
I know, but I have no
But
room
you
for
can,
like my
right?
mouse, right? There we go. Wow. Okay. Good
Hi.
afternoon. We made it. We were a little bit late today. We were running around trying to get everything prepared.
So
It's National Quilt Month.
it is.
I'm super excited because I love to quilt.
You do.
So much fun. Yes.
Yep. So this is going to be all about Sarah month.
Totally. Yep. I'm just going to blab, blab, blab. Lisa's just here.
I'm
look
just
pretty.
gonna sit here and go, huh? Which, yeah. That's my job. Nod my head.
All
Nod my
right.
head.
Yes.
I'll be the bobblehead for the month.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot going on this month. So we have some classes and
We do.
some software classes, and
Your block of the month
is going to
starts.
Yep, at the end of the month. So I see some ladies' names that are in there.
Yeah,
You'll be getting an email soon. We're almost ready. So Lisa
Time sneaks in a lot on those. It's like you think, oh, that's in March. I got plenty of time, and then
it's March.
It's March. I cannot believe it's already March.
I know, it's been a crazy
year so far.
2 months already.
It really has been.
So crazy.
Absolutely.
So we have some stuff to share about
a little bit.
Quilting Month, and some of our tips, and we have like kind of a progression, sort of like we did last
month with embroidery. We're gonna start at the beginning and work our way through kind of doing a quilt kind of thing.
Absolutely. So in order to be successful in quilting, you have to have a variety of different things sort of lined up, kind of like your ducks in a row. And all of these things really make a difference, because I tell people all the time, so you can have the best stitch in the world, but if you didn't cut right to begin with, it doesn't matter. Your piece
you can have an absolutely perfect 1/4 inch, but if your cutting was 1/8 of an inch off, how perfect your seam is still doesn't matter.
Right. Or so some are right and some are wrong.
All of the stars must align for things to actually pan out.
Yes.
And to get your stars in a line, you have to plan, and you have to make sure that you have all of those tools available.
Yes. So we always say there's a little bit of fabric prep involved. So a little bit of preparing your fabric so that it cuts easier.
Right.
And then cutting accurately so that you can piece accurately. And all of those things sort of, it's definitely a progression. I don't know, but it's cute.
I need this in my life. Why don't I have one of these at home? This is adorable.
It's adorable. I know.
Squirrel.
We're easily sidetracked.
Sorry.
So we've had some rotary cutting classes here in the past, and I have a virtual one this coming Saturday.
Right.
So if you are still struggling, you can definitely sign up for that, and we're going to just do it virtually. I'm just going to give you some tips and tricks and things like that to help. That one is $20, which means you can use a punch card if you are a person who has a collection of punches and you need to use them for something.
Well, you can buy punches.
So you can buy punches. Yep, absolutely. So you can still do that. And then I do have a, like, let's start quilting quilt. It's a little baby quilt. It's
introductory
to quilting.
And so that is literally going to take whoever decides to take this class from the very beginning to actually piecing things together. So selecting fabrics, prepping fabrics, trimming fabrics. It's going to literally
this quilt is so cute.
Go through. This is adorable. The fabrics are fantastic. And it's just
it's a little you could use it as a lap quilt if you want. It's kind of like a baby size quilt. So really good project to start with if you've never quilted before, or if maybe you have quilted but you don't really feel like you're being successful, like you're struggling with.
So we've talked about this a little bit before. I took a quilting class. I was going to learn from my grandma, and unfortunately she passed before she got up here, moved back into
Right.
town. And so I took a class and I got the perfect 1/4 inch stitch.
Mhm.
That was a huge part of that class. That was like the first couple of days, I
Right.
swear we spent on getting that, which is important, no
Yes.
doubt. But we didn't talk really at all about cutting, and things didn't work out. I was frustrated the whole time.
Mhm.
And, I felt like I was prepared and I did all, because I got that stitch exact. So I thought, okay, this is going to be great. And,
Yeah, and then it wasn't.
and then it wasn't. And I actually stopped quilting because it was so bad
Yeah.
for me. So we're going to literally take you through all of the steps, not just one important part. We'll make sure that you get all of those important parts. So if you would like to have a good intro to quilting class, I highly recommend that you take. Sarah's definitely
Yep. And
the best I know anyway.
And I've been there. So, I didn't grow up quilting. So I learned sort of later on, I guess not later in life, but later than kids. So
Right.
I learned as an adult. And I struggled too. The person that I was taking classes with was phenomenal, but I don't think she had the confidence in the people that she was teaching to say like, yeah, it's okay.
You have to do this.
Let's cut this, 7 and 7/8 because that's important. If I round that piece up and I don't round everything else up, then nothing ever matches. And so I felt frustrated because I'm like, I'm a smart person. This doesn't seem to be
This math does not math
right. It's not mathing out right. It's not rocket science, and I shouldn't be struggling like I am. So I get it. I understand what it's like to like get part of the information and then not really be able to execute it because you're missing a key point. And and the thing is if you're finished and you're like, yeah, I liked doing it the way that I was doing it before, it's okay. But you have the opportunity
to learn
get the information, right?
Another way to get there.
Right.
And you can then choose and pick and choose the parts that work for you as an individual, because we are definitely all individuals and find our own way. So, you take a class, you learn what the teacher does, which is the whole point of the class. That doesn't mean that you have to adopt 100% of whatever it is that we or someone else is teaching you to do. You should pull and say, okay, this really worked for me. That made perfect sense, but I liked what I was doing over here better. That's okay.
That's okay. Yeah, it absolutely is okay. And but you don't know until you know. And you don't know what you're missing until you kind of have all of the pieces to the puzzle.
Until you've been shown some of those missing pieces.
I have made this quilt, I don't know, at least probably 30 to 40 times. This is like one of my go-to baby quilts that I make. And it's whenever I am feeling like in a rut, like I can't find my sojo, and I know I really want to sew. This is like my go-to.
You'll just sit down and do this to get your groove on.
Because it's something that I can accomplish in a short amount of time, and it makes me.
So you had this done in like a day, right?
I did it in a day. Yep. And it was a day that I also stopped and helped, and I had lunch here and I helped customers, and I did all things. So it's once you've made your first one, it's definitely something that is completely doable in a day. So the class is $100. It's an all day. It's from 10 until 5. We'll have lunch. We're going to talk about fabric choices. We have these kits. If you want some different fabrics, you can get your different fabrics. The fabrics to make this are included. You'll still need backing, fabric, and binding, but that's not much fabric at all. We're going to talk about the fabrics. We're going to talk about how to prep your fabrics. We're going to cut the fabrics, and then we're going to have at least 2 of the rows sewn before you go home so that you know exactly how to finish this. And then you will have sewn not just a block, because that's what happens a lot of times. You
get a block and then you get home and you're like,
nobody shows you how to put your blocks together in a row.
How do I make this actually pattern out like it's supposed to pattern out?
Get my ducks in a row.
That's
exactly.
But so I think that it'll be a really great class. Even if you just want a refresher, I think it would be a great thing. Just to get some tips and little bits and pieces, because every time you do something like that in a group setting or with a new instructor that you maybe haven't taken a quilt class from before, maybe you have, you're still going to get a nugget. And those nuggets are worth the whole ball of wax, because it's not necessarily the whole picture.
Right.
For me, at least when I take a class, I don't go in expecting to be wowed, which maybe that's just me, like, 100%. I want to get those nuggets. What is it that they do that I don't do?
Yep.
that kind of thing.
And we'll have fun. I promise.
Absolutely.
His quilting is fun.
We always have fun
There's
here.
no
so-
crying in quilting. There shouldn't be. I cried a lot when I first started quilting.
I just said, screw this. I'm not doing it.
I was like so upset. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But yeah, this will be a lot of fun. So I highly recommend it for you.
Yeah.
For you. I think you guys will enjoy it. But that's not what we're here to talk about.
no.
We're here to talk about getting started.
Yes, so getting started. So we're going to make the assumption that you've already watched the video that we did on fabric prepping, which is like starching your fabrics and or
Sounds silly, but it's super important.
it really does
really
make a big
is
difference.
Going to make a big difference.
Yeah, so starch your fabrics before you start. Make sure you have enough fabric to do so because it will shrink. Or if you
Yes.
pre-wash your fabrics, it will shrink because that's what happens when you introduce
it does.
water to cotton. It shrinks. Should. So we're assuming you have that underneath your belt.
Yep.
And then you go and you've cut accurately. And again, if you need help with that, we have a class for that. Or come in and talk to me about it.
But real quick,
Yes.
best press.
Fast press.
Don't just like, it's not like air freshener. Don't just spritz.
Yes. You want it.
You want to get your stuff wet. That's the whole point.
Yeah, the stiffer the better.
And that will make, when you go to piece things together, it won't be flopsy underneath your needle. So that's
Yep.
going to be a big thing. So your prep, super important. We both use mostly best press for that kind of thing. And you're going to do that before you cut, not after you cut, God forbid.
Yes.
And then cutting again, we've got a free, not free, could be free if you're using a coupon,
Yep.
but a virtual, so you don't have to even come here. You can just chill at home in your PJs
Yep.
and learn about cutting this Saturday. That starts at 10:30.
10:30.
I think
10:30 sounds
10:30.
right. Yep.
Great for cutting some super quick things. Get a rotary cutter that's comfortable in your hand. And we both now like the Quilter Select. I've converted you.
Yeah, there's a time and a place for
There is
the other
absolutely a
rulers.
time and a place for the others, but the Quilter Select, when you're talking about getting it a specifically accurate cut,
Yeah.
are a phenomenal thing.
They
So,
have a really, this is a little tiny one, but they have a special coating on them that makes them darn near impossible to move.
when you move it, the fabric moves
the
with
whole
it,
fabric
which
moves.
means you're not getting that slippage, which is what causes incorrect cuts.
Yes, that is a big, big, big problem
So
for
huge,
people.
huge helpful.
So,
So not going to go into more details on that. So prepping and cutting accurately. So now
Yes.
we're sitting in front of the machine. I got
now-
all my stuff. What do I do?
Right. We need to find a way to get a 1/4 inch. And there's this thing called a scant 1/4 inch.
But is it a thing?
It's a
It's a thing, but it's not real.
a measurable thing.
It's not a real thing because it's
because you can't measure it.
no.
What is a scant 1/4 inch and how do I measure it? And when I first started doing like construction work with Dave, I was not sewing at all and I didn't do quilting, right? So I didn't pay much attention to rulers. So I remember him asking me to measure something for him and I was like, yeah, it's 7 and 3 nibs.
3 of those little guys.
And he was like, what? I'm like, the third one. And I knew that it needed to be accurate. I just wasn't really sure
What the measurement was.
right where we were going with this. So I've come a long
Well,
way.
see, that's funny. We always have funny stories about our men, don't we?
Yeah.
So when we cut,
Yeah.
Jeff's always like, which side of the line am I cutting on with the blade?
Right.
You're like, because you have to take
The blade width.
the blade
yes.
width into consideration. So, we generally are doing tile,
Yeah.
which that little blade width, that can make a big difference
Difference
if you're
in your
doing a
cut.
whole floor
Yeah.
and you don't account for that every time.
Right.
You're all like, so yes.
Yeah.
Men and measuring.
Men
so
and
much fun.
measurements are
So much
fun.
fun.
Yeah.
So much fun.
So
But not to say that any men that happen to be listening to this don't know how to measure. That's not what I meant.
No.
It's just what we speak and what men speak are not always the
Right.
same thing.
Right.
So it is important to
right.
be able to say, this is what I'm cutting.
Exactly.
And so our point to that, not to offend any hardcore quilters out there, there is no real measurement for a scant. Somebody puts scant 1/4 inch. All that means is that it's less than a 1/4 inch. There is
Right.
no actual, and if you Google it or if you look for a bunch of different comments, everybody will tell you it's a different thing. Oh, it's 2 needle positions, or oh, it's 1 needle position, or That's the whole point. It's not a true measurement. There is no way to get an exact number from that
Right.
code in a pattern.
And so I always remember Dave and I were talking about this, and he says to me, can you imagine? So my grandpa was in tool and die at Chrysler, and he said, can you imagine if your grandpa went over to somebody and said, I need you to make this
Just a scan.
this bolt a scant 3 3/8. They would have looked at him like he had 3 heads or something.
Absolutely.
And he was like, you can't teach people that because you don't have a way of being precise
You can't
about
qualify it.
And he was absolutely right, because really I need to find a way that I can duplicate and make teachable. And so I've come up with, and this is not brand new to me, but it is just the easiest way that I have found of making sure that people understand.
I covered up all your stuff, didn't I?
I mean, I had everything spread out. So how I determine what the seam allowance is going to be and how I measure what the quilt world would probably consider a scant 1/4 of an inch. And the reason that we call it a scant 1/4 of an inch is because it's really, really, really hard to measure your actual seam here. Like, do I measure on the left side of the stitches? Do I measure on the right side of the stitch? Right. Where am I measuring from? In this method, it doesn't really matter because we're going to measure something that is definitive.
Yep.
So I do what I call a sewing test, and this is not rocket science by any stretch of the imagination. And you could change this up in different measurements that work for you. 5.5 inches is something that is easy for me to remember.
Okay.
So I typically use 5.5. So I take 3 2.5-inch strips of fabric, okay? And I sew them together like this. So these are sewn together, all right? And then I press them. And I want to press these seams how I plan on pressing
it in your quilt.
In my quilt, whether that is open or to
one of the
side, right? So I'm going to press this in whatever manner it is that I am going to press my seams. And I'll talk about how I determine how I'm going to press my seams in just 1 second. Once I do that, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this inside piece, and inside the 2 seams, inside the 2 seams, right, I am going to measure this. And we have a picture of this. And this, if I have sewn this correctly, it is going to measure 2 inches. Yep, go down. There we go. All right, so I'm going to share Lisa's screen here. Ooh, that's not the picture I wanted. A little bit bigger. There we go. So on this, can you hit the hide button on your...
I can. Oh, that's showing, isn't it?
Yep. There we go. So on this picture here, my little arrows are pointing to
your seams.
My seam. So it's underneath the ruler, and I've got my... This is a very strange... I probably should have picked the 2-inch part instead of the 1/2 inch plus 1 plus a 1/2. But that is where that's where I went. So I've got a 1/2 inch, I've got 1 inch across, and then I've got another 1/2 inch over here. So I know that my measurement is measuring 2 inches. That is my goal. All right. So if I can duplicate this, then that means that I have mastered the 1/4 inch, because if you math that out, if I have 2.5, so my left strip is 2.5, my middle strip is 2.5, my right strip is 2.5 when I start, then I'm taking a 1/4 of an inch seam off of each one, right? So there's basically a 1/2 inch being deducted in the middle, and the 1/2 inch being deducted in the middle, like where those arrows are.
Yep.
So I had what would have been a larger piece.
Yep.
And then I deducted that, and the inside inch piece, since it was 2.5, I took a 1/4 of an inch off of each side, and now I can measure that at 2 inches. So this is how I determine what is my 1/4 of an inch. So the other thing that you can kind of see underneath here is the arrow on the right. So that one, the one that's like all the way across the ruler, that one is I press that seam open, and underneath it, if you look very closely, you can see I've got the ruler right on basically the pressed seam, and my seam is pressed open, and you can see that you can actually measure pretty much a 1/4 of an inch on either side. So it's a pretty standard 1/4 inch there. It's not scant, it's not bigger, it's
Nope.
not smaller.
So what we're talking about is there's like a little bit wider section there
Mhm.
on each side of where your seam is, and
Right.
that is the actual extra fabric that's in the seam.
That is the extra
So,
fabric in
and
the
when
seam.
you're looking at it through the ruler, through the fabric, that's what we're seeing. And if you line up that with the ruler markings, you
Mhm.
have a 1/4 inch to the left and a 1/4 inch to the right of that extra fabric. So that was your seam allowance.
That was my seam allowance, yes.
That's been pressed open.
Yeah, but that's really hard to measure accurately with a ruler. I think if you scroll through your pictures there, I don't remember what order I put anything in here.
Yeah.
Is it not scrolling?
No.
Oh, now
There
it
we
is.
go. What am I looking for?
Keep going.
There's that. There's what we were talking about.
Yep.
The edges there. This is pointing to that.
Yep. And then there,
This is trying to measure it, I'm assuming, with a ruler.
yes. So I'm taking this same seam, and it is pressed to one side here as opposed to being pressed open. And you can see that it almost appears to be just a tad bit. Look at that. We just lost. Like, I hope everybody is still there.
Oh, where did our signal go?
Yes, I am not. Okay, so it appears as though the seam is just a smidge bigger because you can see my stitching line to the left of the ruler, and then you can see the seam is kind of just a tad bit over. But again, when I measure that, it measures out perfectly fine in between, because what we have a little bit of fabric that's taking up the distance, and we have a little bit of thread that is making the difference in there.
So what's really important in your measurement is where your actual pieces are sized on the top.
Yes.
So on the quilt top, not necessarily the seam allowance that's sticking out the back.
Right, because where do you measure? Do I measure to the left side of the thread? Do I measure to the right side? Do I press my seam open? Do I measure from the center of that space? Right. It's very, very difficult to duplicate and be accurate with that measurement. And what I have found over the course of doing this is that, honestly, when I take my ruler and I measure a 1/4 of an inch seam from like the right side of the stitch to the edge of that, if my seam is really at that 1/4 of an inch mark, it's almost always too big.
It's almost too big.
It's almost always too big. And because I really should be measuring probably from the left side of the seam, not the
Just
right
like your
side,
blade width.
just like your
seam,
blade width,
the
that
seam
matters.
of the seam, actual, how much room does the seam take up is
Yes.
really what we're talking about. So the threads that you've got in there, and how much room that's taking up in the seam. So when you
Yes.
go to press it open, what's it doing to the fabric?
Exactly. That all makes a difference in the big picture. So the thing that is different about everybody's cutting and about everybody's visual is where we place things underneath the foot, how we place things into the edge of the foot. But the one thing that we can master is we can measure this. And I promise you that if you measure this and you get that 2 inches inside and you cut your fabric 2.5 when you started, if you put your fabric and you use that thread and you do that over and over and over again, you will become much more accurate.
Yep.
And you will find that your blocks and your pieces are now the size that they are supposed to be. You don't feel like
then
you need
don't
to
have
stretch and pull.
Now I have to
or
smidge
trim
this
down,
and
fudge it.
Fudge it.
Yes.
There's no fudging necessary when you get that there.
Exactly.
And so this, in case you missed it, will maybe change if you change threads.
Yes.
So if you have a much thicker thread
It's going to take up
It's
more
going to
space.
take up more space, and therefore it's going to adjust your measurement.
It will adjust your measurement. Whether or not you are pressing your seams open or to the side, they do take up a little bit. That takes up a little less space in the seam allowance than when you press your fabric. And that's going to be a lot more noticeable if you're using something like flannel versus cotton or batiks, because they are going to be substantially thinner. So that is really going to make, and of course, if you're using something like fleece, it's all over.
So do you do this basically before you start a quilt based on this is the thread that I'm using and these are the fabrics that I'm using?
I actually have.
Or do you have a book?
I have a little cheat sheet at home.
That's what I was saying. I have a cheat. I actually have from that first class, even though I thought it sucked, I saved everything. I actually have, and it's right on the fabric.
Yeah.
What I used, what my machine settings were.
Right.
And how I got to that point.
Yes.
So that I could match up what I had in there with something in the future.
Exactly.
So if you have that planned out and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to do this basically the same as that other quilt that I did 5 quilts ago.
Right.
If you have those notes, you don't have to keep doing this over and over again. You know what to set your machine at. You know what's going to happen.
Right.
As long as you follow all of those same rules.
Exactly.
So documenting and keeping track of the different threads and the settings that you need to achieve perfection on those things.
And if you sew on different machines, your settings are going to be on different machines. So where I put my fabric and what my stitch is and what foot I use is different on my Bernina, it is different on my brother, and it is different on my Baby Lock. All 3 of them are completely different.
And most likely, if I sat down after you got this and I sat down and sewed, I would get a different result than you would.
It is possible.
It's possible. I'm not saying it's absolute, but it is a possibility.
Because of, we're going to show you a couple more slides in a second.
Where do I put my fabric?
Where do you put your fabric and how you look at it? Because we all look at the fabrics a little bit differently. And I know for me personally, I struggle sometimes. My eyes really want, they really, really, really want to look at the needle. And of course, you will sew like a drunken sailor
if you're looking at the needle.
You are just staring at the needle. You will not sew straight. And sometimes I find that I do that more often than not. And so for me, finding a focal point on the bed of my machine that I can focus on is the key to making sure that my
continue to stitch where you want to be.
Is as straight as possible. And I feel like I'm been drawn very like to the type of projects where I'm basically sewing diagonally across the seam right now. And oh my gosh, because where am I looking? I'm looking at that seam and that needle, and I look at the seam and I'm like, it's like I'm drunk. I'm not. There's no drinking involved in this. So you know, I tried again. I'm constantly
I'll be 50
trying.
at the end of this year. Then we can start
drinking.
Yes, when I'm 50. That's the
So it's just one of those weird things, right? Trying to find the focal point. So it's super important to try to find something that works for you and be consistent. And that is why where I put my needle position might be a little bit different than where Lisa puts her needle position
because of how we look at it, how we hold the fabric.
Yes.
You know, to get it lined up with the edge of my foot. Yes. Do I need to see a little poking out, or do I like it to be tucked under, or all of those things will come into play, which is why what works for me may not work for you and vice versa.
Exactly. And you know, we have snap-on feet, and so many other companies have snap-on feet, and there's a little more wiggle.
There's a little play
in snap-on feet than there would be in something that is completely solid. So, you know, my Jane has a very solid foot. And
it's not going anywhere.
It doesn't go anywhere. So, you know, I don't have to worry about if I'm running the fabric on the edge of that foot, because the edge of the foot is always in the same spot.
It's the edge of the foot.
That's right. Right. But if I am looking at my my brother machine, the foot has a little bit of wiggle. So sometimes it's over a little bit more than not. So that plays a part in where I'm putting the fabric. So I try to find a place on my plate. That way, if my foot is wiggling just a little bit, it doesn't matter. I'm being very consistent about where I place my fabric.
That's a great tip.
That is my tip. And so even if it means you have to put a little, you know, if you put a piece of tape on there, if you do something like that, one of those things should help you find the sweet spot. give us just 1 second here.
You're hardwired.
I am.
I mean, in theory, that should be.
Unless it's not.
No, I meant the Wi-Fi.
Right. So that is, so I can see,
Yeah.
right? But I'm wondering,
Yeah, but that said Laboo's, didn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, I changed them both to Laboo. I didn't like that.
No. Why don't you just, do you think you need to, do we need to snap a picture of that? Or are they going to think we're crazy when we tell
Well,
them?
aren't we?
I mean, possibly. Okay. So we got some new Wi-Fi, or we got some new internet things here, and
You're trying to make it better?
it doesn't.
How's that going?
So hopefully we're still on, and everything is going well. It would be great if anybody that's on Facebook, if you could just give us a little thumbs up or say hi, just to confirm that we're actually still speaking to people and not just ourselves. Okay, so I am going to add this up. There it goes again. There we go.
Okay, Mary's on Facebook.
Okay, yay, good. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Mary.
So here we go. I'm going to add this back on. It's this one. This one. There we go. And we're going to talk a little bit about feet, because everybody likes to have feet. Okay, YouTube is good. Good to know. Good, good.
Thank
good.
you. Thank you.
All right. So
there's a couple options here.
There are. And so a lot of people may not use this clear plastic foot, but I took the picture of the clear plastic foot, honestly, so that you could really see
through the foot.
what we're doing. So assuming that you have a machine that has a stitch width that is wider than 5 millimeters, okay? If you are sewing on a machine that is a 5 millimeter machine, then what I'm about to say is not going to be true for you, okay? So all of our brothers and all of our baby locks and the majority of machines
and whatnot, yes,
that are out there, we have 7 millimeter wide feed dogs, which basically means the distance from the left feed dog to the right feed dog is the stitchable area is going to be 7 millimeters. So that little opening on your plate is going to allow you to do a 7 millimeter wide stitch. What that really means is that when you are on the center needle position, if you put a 1/4 inch foot on, which is the picture that you are seeing right now. So this is a 1/4 inch foot. So if you're looking at that picture, you can see the back part of the foot looks like it's almost covering the feed dog, but then you've got that little kind of like angle and the little nub in the front. That's actually where you ride your fabric when you're doing your 1/4 inch.
Right, so the edge of that front plastic piece is where I'm putting my fabric.
Exactly. And what you can see very clearly underneath there is the entirety of your right feed dog, which means that no matter how accurately I try to sew, I am basically driving a unicycle.
Yes. How good are you guys at that? Because I'm not so hot.
Right. So there's only one feed dog. So your left feed dog is the only part that actually has contact with your fabric right now. When that happens, we tend to have to compensate for, exactly, you get a little bit of kicking that's going on.
So have you ever had to keep doing this
with
right? Your fabric?
Because it feels like it's shifting, right?
It's just being a little fish under there and it's flopping around.
Yes.
It doesn't just lay right where you need it to be. And it's because it's being only fed from one half of your system.
Yes. So
what does that mean?
That means that there is a better way to do this.
That does.
You won't have to feel like you're pulling your hair out.
Now, how many of you are at home going, but I love my 1/4 inch foot?
Yeah. And a lot of people do. And I'm not here to say don't use it.
Nope.
I am just here to say that
this is what can happen.
You are struggling and we feel you. And I definitely struggled because I came from a brand of machine that was a 5.5 millimeter machine. And I used my 1/4 inch foot and I sewed a perfect 1/4 inch seam and it was never a problem. And then I went to a machine that had a 9mm wide.
How'd that go?
It was like the Grand Canyon in there. And I was like a drunken sailor again. So I constantly struggled, and I did not like to piece on that machine. So I would always go to the other machine.
One.
And then I came here, and we had 7mm, and I put that 1/4 inch foot on, and I was like a drunken sailor again. And I was like, this isn't working for me.
So what do you do?
So I realized that there are, I guess I will call them provisions, because we are not, this is not an unordinary thing.
No, not
right?
at all. No.
Brother and Baby Lock realize this, and so they make some special stitches on the machine that help us compensate for this. And by doing that, that means that we can use our
regular J foot.
So
do I have a picture?
There are a couple pictures. Yep.
So here's a little bit clearer image.
That's with the foot down.
The foot's down, so you can see that whole feed dog just hanging out there, right? Yep. All right.
And then
this is your J foot.
Yes.
Look what's not hanging out.
Right. The right feed dog.
The right feed dog is completely covered up with both foot and fabric.
Yes. So right now, the stitch that I have selected on the machine is the piecing stitch right. And we have a picture of what that looks like in a couple slides ahead. So we'll show you. You've got a left, a middle, and a right. So we'll have a little picture of that. And so right now, where I have the fabric is along the edge of the foot. But remember, I said that sometimes I struggle with that.
Yep. So your foot might not be where you thought it was.
It might not be exactly where I thought it was. So for me personally, when I'm actually sewing at home, I use the edge of the plate. So that little open kind of like dark spot that you see on the edge, that is where I line my fabric up, which means that I'm moving my needle position over
one
just a
shift
smidge.
to the right.
Yes. And I feel like this is kind of like a dirty little secret. Like nobody really talks about this a lot. If you have a machine that has like an electronic touchscreen.
Yep.
When you go into the quilting menu, and you adjust your needle position from the quilting menu,
you get a different adjustment measurement.
You have smaller, like micro adjustments that are half as small.
It's 0.12 instead of, or 0.12 and 0.13 alternatively instead of 0.25.
Yes, so half the size of the normal incremental movement, which means that you can really personalize that, and you don't really have to make huge adjustments on the placement of your fabric. You can make adjustments on your needle position. So that is what I typically do.
Same.
And that has worked out great for me. I did not bring it over here today, but they do make like a seam guide that you can put in the front of the machine, that if you like to use that, that is a fantastic way of doing things. Again, it brings your eye
forward,
closer to you so that you're not staring down there, because it's really easy to move your eye from that corner to that
up
needle.
To the needle, because that's what's moving.
Because that's what's
that's
moving.
What you're drawn to.
In your mind, you're like, don't sew your finger, even though I'm not going to do that.
The other dirty secret is that if you're looking at the needle, by the time you realize there's a problem, it's too late. You can't fix it.
Right.
And if you're looking, 3 inches in front of the needle, and you're like, ooh, got to make an adjustment, you've got time.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So click to the next one.
I can do that.
Then you can see I haven't done anything. I just lifted the foot and I changed the angle of this. And the reason that I did that is so that you can see the fabric is completely covering. I know it's really dirty over there.
It's dirty over there.
So that is really, it's covering the entirety of that feed dog foot, the feed dog underneath the foot.
So Jane would like to know what the name of the seam guide is. It's really out of the box. It's called Seam Guide.
It's the Baby Lock seam guide.
It's the Baby Lock seam guide that we're referring to. It's a metal piece that's about 2 inches-ish. It's got a screw in there that screws directly into the needle plate, and it's got a slide, so you can adjust it from, it's not just a 1/4 inch seam guide, it's a multiple measurement seam guide specific for sewing.
Exactly.
It's a great little guy.
Yes. So we probably, when we're done talking about this, can pull that up on our website and show you what it looks like. So again, I didn't move the fabric, but if I were stitching at home, I would have that fabric butted up to the edge of that plate there
So you wouldn't see that little black line there to the right of the
Yeah,
fabric.
I want to touch it on the screen here, like you're going to be able to
see that, and
but
that
I know
doesn't
that's
really
not gonna
work.
happen.
Can you see oh, you can. So this guy right here is where we're talking about.
Yeah.
Did that work?
I think, well, I mean, we can see it, so maybe because they can see all of your screen, you can see that. Anyways.
Yeah.
That is where we would line our fabric up. All right, so let's go forward again.
We did these.
We did these, yep, and there's going to be some pictures. There we go. So here are the 3 pictures. Obviously, there's a little thing of thread hanging over the corner.
That's thread.
That's thread. So are you okay? Oh, okay. All right, so you have Q1, you have Q2, and you have Q3. Q3 is, it says left. If you arrow down.
Q3, right there, and the left is right
it's kind of
there.
blue.
Oh, look at.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn.
And then if you keep arrowing,
I'm going.
I've got the other ones highlighted. So this is the stitch that I typically use. That is Q2, and that is piecing stitch right. And then that one that is in blue, that is the piecing stitch middle. If you were going to use a quilting foot, so a 1/4 inch piecing foot, that would be the one
center needle position, and that's what your specific.
That's what
have
those
the ability
feet.
for.
Yes, and then one more picture, I think. If you have maybe a machine that isn't fancy dancy like these, you can see that those are what the stitches might look like on your machine. And the underneath, like it says 29, 30, and 31. And then right underneath the numbers, there's like that little oval, and then there's a dot. So the dot is referencing the needle position. So the first one is to the right, the middle is middle, and 31 is to the left. So you will have something like that, and it says like PPP kind of right down there. So that is referencing the piecing stitches. Alternately, the Q that's next to it that ended up being into that picture, that is what they would consider a hand quilting stitch. So the Q stands for quilting. I don't. Also, a couple stitches over there is a serpent, is like a stipple. That is not a stipple that you would quilt your quilt with. I don't know.
I don't know why that's even on the machine.
Every brand of machine does that. People are like, oh, it's going to stipple for me. It's not. It's going to make a stipple that's 5 millimeters
or whatever wide,
and it'll take you a year.
And it doesn't look very good.
No, and the S corresponds with a side cutter.
I suppose if you were putting like ribbon down or something like that, you could stitch that on a ribbon and it might be okay. But outside of that, I don't know what else you would actually do with that.
Right. So just a very, very, very strange way of doing that. So those are the stitches. Now, if your machine looks like this and you select 29, 30, or 31 as your stitches, because this is not a touchscreen style machine, you are not, unfortunately, going to get the smaller increments when you're
still going to have that 1/4 millimeter.
Yes, that is one of the advantages of going to the slightly larger machines or having a sewing and embroidery combo machine, because those alternately have those touchscreens and they have that feature to them, which is a really nice thing.
It is definitely a nice thing.
So if anybody were ever going to listen to me and change a machine and do something, I would tell them to give people that option on this style machine as well. But no one does, so I'm probably just talking to myself.
Well,
but there is that. So now we are going to, nope, that is it.
Okay.
So this is what that seemed, let's see if I can get a non-glared picture here.
Nah, it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
No, this is what the package looks like. And this is what the actual seam guide looks like. So this gets screwed in on the bed of the machine. And then it's this little thing down here. That's the little guide.
That's where you would rub your fabric right along.
You just run your fabric like so.
And so again, it adjusts. So you can, so it doesn't have to be just a 1/4 inch. It could be for 5/8 inch or whatever you happen to be doing, clothing or whatever.
Yes.
Yep.
And we have just a couple of really cute rulers down here that can help you sort of measure small things, or if you're trying to cut your 2.5-inch strips and you're struggling. So this is a teeny tiny little ruler. This is really great to have next to you if you do a lot of those connector blocks or diagonal blocks or things like that, because a lot of times you're drawing or
and
cutting
you need
and
it a
you're
little
trimming.
bit longer than a lot of
The little
a lot of the
rulers.
little ones don't make the corner to corner. So
No,
that
so
it is great, and that is just 2.5 by 6.5 in case
yeah,
anybody was wondering.
yeah, just a nice thing. And
And
then
this is
this
about the
little
same
guy,
size tool, but it's very different.
it is.
It does have a rulered edge, so you can use the edge of that as a ruler. But all the little things in the middle mean
Right.
so much.
You've got, this is like a cheater seam guide. So all of those little holes and that little writing there, what they are is their measurements. So this is like 2 inches to the edge of here. So what you can do is you can gently move your hand wheel down, and you can find like where the 1/4 inch one is, which happens to be the second one on here. Then you can place this on the bed of your machine, and then you can line up your seam guide right on the edge of this, which can help you get your accurate 1/4 inch, 5/8, 3/8, whatever
You're looking
it
for.
is. And it also has a cute little thing in the corner here that can help you measure a 1/4 inch. Like if you're
From a
checking out
corner.
your seams and you're trying to see how well you did, you can get a little bit of an idea here. But these are just little tools that are very nice. They're relatively inexpensive. So this one is just $7, so $6.99. I have one of those stash in stores in my next to them, and these actually fit sideways in the stash in stores. So I have a slightly different version of this, but I have a Tula pink one that's pink. It came in one of those like little
Sure.
goodie boxes that
Yep.
you subscribe to.
Yep.
So these are just kind of sticking into my seam in my stash in stores, and I reference them often to draw. So earlier I mentioned that I would tell you when I choose to press my seams open and when I choose to press my seams to the side. So sometimes I do them, sometimes I have both ways in my quilt. In a normal quilt, this is what I would consider a normal quilt, right? Squares and rectangles. My preferred method is always going to be to one side.
To one side.
Right? For 2 reasons. When I press my seams in one direction or the other, when I go to, I'm just going to cut the piece of fabric that I have down here because it'll be easier for you to see. So, repress that in a really crappy way. One direction.
It'll work.
So if I have my seam, right, my seams on this one are pressing out. So if I were going to press this block, this row, and this was the second row or the second part of my block, I would press the 2 pieces on the inside of this so that they go to the center.
This one you would go
on the
that
outside,
way, and that one you would do what?
I would press to the inside, or I would press them all going in one direction and then all going in the opposite direction.
So like every other row.
Yes. So, and the reason that I like to do that is because then when I go to put 2 pieces of fabric together, if my seams are opposite, what happens is they nest.
Yep.
So
makes it a lot easier to get your points to match up.
That's right. So, okay, get
focus.
Focus. I know you can do it. It's white. Anyways, they will nest really, really nice in the center here. When my seams are pressed open or they are pressed to the same direction,
right,
you will not get nice nesting seams because there isn't like a gate for them
there's
to
it
butt
can
up
slide.
against. Exactly.
It's too easy for them to slide. So when they have an edge to butt up to, they basically don't shift because they're kind of stuck in that position. But if you have pressed that open and then you've got like a little star thing going on.
Right.
But there's nothing stopping the one from sliding a little right and left or whatnot underneath your foot.
Yep.
Where when they're nested, that has like a ridge.
Right.
That it won't allow it to really move. And so you get those really precise corners.
You can really just you can see how all those corners They just meet up so nice in that corner. And then on the back, they just nest really, really well back here. And that makes it a lot easier. So if the project that I'm working at is squares and rectangles.
Yeah, I mean, you can pull and it still stays right in there. Yep.
Nesting them will make a big, big difference. And if you didn't know that, you've been struggling with it, I promise you this is like a life-changing moment, because I did not know this at the beginning.
I didn't either.
And I was like,
I pressed mine all open because that's what they taught me to do.
Right.
And then
wherever.
And then I'm like, well, that didn't match. And what happens if you're off on the first one? What happens by the end of the row?
Unless that was just one wicked block,
they're all off.
They're all off.
Right.
Sometimes they're off in different manners, and sometimes it's all a little wonky. But if you can nest them, nest them. Now, sometimes if I'm doing star blocks, or I'm doing connecting blocks, or I'm doing, I call a connecting block a block where I have one piece and then I basically have another piece that I'm gonna like sew diagonally across. So
you got a bunch of things
I've
going
got
on.
Pieces going on this way. What happens is I'm okay nesting one in one direction, but then the next one comes, and suddenly when I put all of those pieces together, they become very, very bulky in the middle, and it's hard to press.
Right.
Because it doesn't want to stay down. So on connecting blocks, a lot of times I will press those open because they will lay flatter. So that is stars where I have lots of points coming in together. And like those little connecting block pieces,
yep.
Those are the only time that I traditionally press open. That quilt that we have hanging up at the front of the store, it's basically just half square triangles
over and over and
over and over and over again. And it's they're kind of mixed in there. The larger blocks I pressed to one side, and the smaller ones I pressed open. Because they I think they finished to be like 1 inch. And that was just, it was very hard to get them to
too much fabric in one spot.
Press to one side or the other. There it goes again. So that is, those are our tips. Those are our tips to being more accurate when you are sewing. Yep. And the more accurate you are when you are sewing, the easier it is and the more confidence that you will build as you are moving along in this.
So, prep, cut well, test. And your test is a 2.5 by something.
Yes.
You like 5.5, but it could be whatever. It's just a matter of what you're looking, are you trying to get a whatever your rectangle is obviously going to be the multiplication.
You can do 6.5 if you have I have a 6.5 inch ruler. So if you do, 3 2.5 by 6.5, it'll be a 6.5 inch square when you're done.
And you can measure that out, and it should be 6.5 by 6.5. Yep. And if it's not, something ain't right. You either cut something wrong or you sewed something wrong. But before you start your whole quilt project, you should be able to get that measurement out.
That's right. And the second tip that I can give you that could potentially be life-changing, even if you have starched your fabrics or you have pre-washed your fabrics, the one thing that I never do when I am piecing my blocks is add water. I do not steam my blocks, and I do not add more starch, or I do not add more water, because when your fabrics are wet, you can stretch them to be almost any size that you want. So they can shrink, or you can get weird stretching that happens. So I do not use, I pre-starch my fabrics, get them flat, and then I do not introduce water or starch when I am piecing.
But what if I have a steam iron?
I do not put water in my steam iron.
Yeah, I don't either. I knew the answer to that. That was for your benefit there, guys. So neither of us put water actually in the iron, and then there's no accidentally, oops, it did it.
Right.
I didn't mean to. But if you don't have water in there, it doesn't matter what setting is, it's not going to do anything.
Mm-mm.
And if you do need water at some other point, we both have a spray bottle of water by the iron that we can introduce the water ourselves and then steam it by the
Yes.
heat from
Yeah.
the iron. Not only will that prevent you from making that mistake, it'll also
Yes.
make your iron last longer.
It will, yeah. No matter what, I feel like introducing water in the iron, you can get particulates, right? You can get a little bit, you can get rust spots, you can
Yep.
get all kinds of little brown spots and things like that that happen later on. Doesn't happen right away.
No, of course not.
And then it starts to leak, and then it just becomes problematic. So,
You know, get yourself a nice iron.
Yeah.
Don't put water in it.
yeah, I mean, honestly, if you want a steam iron, buy like one of
Buy a
those.
steamer.
Right, buy one of those Laura Star irons. The iron itself doesn't hold the water. It's like in a chamber
It's a tank, right?
and a tank. But no matter what anybody says, eventually your regular hand iron is going to start leaking if you put water in it. At some point, it's just going to. So it will never leak if you don't put water in it.
That is absolutely accurate. There you go.
Right?
I just bought it also, and I'm like, it is not having water.
Yes, yes.
I have
That's
a
Absolutely.
Rolenta, and I have it also, and I just missed everything. so
Yeah.
I put water in mine.
that is
So that would be our recommendations for everybody. And if
How far
that
are
that
you
should
up
get
here?
you started.
you're fine. You're fine.
You're good. It's all
We're
good.
just doing a Facebook and a YouTube. And you're
It's all
it's all
good.
right. It's all
great.
right. Yep.
Interactive. That's it's all good.
All right.
So thank you guys so much for joining us today. That should get you started.
I have our names wrong again.
I noticed that earlier. I was just not going to say anything. So
So
I'm Lisa.
I'm Sarah. I'm not Lisa.
And Sarah has that class coming up, both the Rotary this Saturday and the quilting next Tuesday.
Yes.
So if you haven't already, sign up. You will not regret it. She's got some fantastic information to share with you.
Absolutely.
That's what's happening around here. Next week, we will continue on our quilting journey, and we will talk about some, I don't remember but some new things about quilting, and that'll be next Wednesday. So don't forget to do all the things, like and share, and if you haven't already, subscribe. Did I miss one?
Share, like, subscribe. That's it.
I think that's it. So thanks for
All right.
hanging. We will see you guys next time.
Bye. Oh, that is not what I thought was going to happen. Let's try that again. Bye.
Bye.